Hey guys, Winnemeat here, and today we'll be creating this Aurora effect in Blender. So this is mostly going to be a shader-based tutorial, but the first thing we want to do is set up a mesh for this. So the idea of the shader is that we're going to have a ribbon sort of shape, a flat plane that's been extruded in a sort of S shape, and we'll apply an Aurora effect on top of that. So we can add in a plane, and we can rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. Then we can go into top view by pressing numpad 7, hold Z and go into wireframe, so we can select both of the two vertices on an edge, and then we'll just extrude it with the E key into a sort of curved S shape. Make sure each of the segments are about the same shape. Don't make a super long one because we're going to be subdividing it. And make sure the height is also roughly the same. Now we can create some distortions in the top because it's not supposed to be completely even. First we'll add a subdivision surface modifier in order to make this smoother. And then we're going to distort the top. So with the top edge selected, you can just double click. What you can do is go into vertex groups and apply a vertex group. We can call it like top or something like that. And if you hit assign with these selected, these top vertices selected, we'll have a new vertex group called top. And then we can apply a displacement modifier to those and have it only affect our vertex group. So you'll see this displacement modifier affects all the vertices. If we only apply to top, you'll see only the top vertex group gets affected. Now to change this effect, we'll add a texture and we'll change it into a clouds texture for some standard noisy behavior. And you'll see this sort of behavior occurring. Now what you want to do is you want to change the direction. So we're only going to have this distortion on the Z axis. So we can change the direction to Z and change the space to global. And we'll have our mountain peaks. Now you may see a bit of Z fighting like this if you extrude too far because of face collisions. You can see this if you turn on, if you apply the subdivision surface modifier. So we can sort of drag this upwards in order to fix some of that, but the easiest way would be to reduce the size. Too much Z fighting will result in some weird visual artifacts, and we really don't want that. And so we have a ribbon now. Cool. Okay, so let's change the render engine to EEVEE. Go into this render tab and change the render engine to EEVEE, and we'll start creating a new shader. So now the way to do this is to build up a sort of solution from a bunch of individual components. So if you look at a picture of an Aurora, you'll notice a couple things. First, you'll see a gradient from going from bright to dark, from bottom to top, as well as a lot of vertical streaks. And I think that's a pretty cool effect and not too difficult to manage. So first let's create that gradient. We'll create a new Aurora material, and we'll call it Aurora, and we're going to remove this principled shader and we'll replace it with an emission shader. This is so that our Aurora will cast a bit of light. Now, in order to make a gradient from bottom to top, we need to give it a gradient texture, which you can find in the Textures tab. By the way, you press Shift-A to access this menu of nodes. Okay, and you'll see we have a gradient. This goes from the negative x-axis to the positive x-axis. If we want to alter this, we need to give it some sort of coordinate system to be relative to, and we need to have some modification to that coordinate system. In order to do that, we add a texture coordinate as well as a mapping node. So the texture coordinate will give us what our gradient is relative to, and our mapping node is going to allow us to change the mapping of that gradient. Okay, so our texture coordinate can just be plugged into generated, and then our mapping can Now for our mapping, we'll have to rotate this. You can figure out what rotation axis to do it on by going into local coordinate preview and then checking, but the easiest way is just to test it yourself. So you can just change one at a time and you'll see which one has the desired effect. So we want this black area to be on the bottom. And it appears that rotating on the Z coordinate does the trick. So we'll just set this to -90, and there we go. There is our effect. This already looks pretty cool. Sort of a toon shaded mountain range or something. And you'll see these weird visual artifacts. These are a result of our displacement modification. And you'll see that if we disable this, they'll go away. But I think I like them, so I'm going to keep them here. If you want to reduce their instance, you can always turn down the strength of the displacement. Just make sure not to turn it up too far. Now, in order to change the color of this, the way we change the color of any texture is by using a color ramp. So this allows us to map the normal black and white range into whatever range of colors we want. So we can go to Converter, Color Ramp, and we can change these colors. Now, again, we said the bottom would be white and the top would be dark. If we look at sort of an image, we might be able to find that there's only a small band of white near the bottom and a bunch of other colors closer to the end. So maybe we'll have it fade from a dark blue to a lighter blue at the end, maybe to a greenish color. Something like that. This can tint more towards the blue, and there we go. Now, if we want to raise the amount of white there is on the edge, we can always just move around these markers to make minor modifications. All right. Now, another aspect of this is that the Aurora will fade out in transparency as we go from bottom to top. Transparency in EEVEE is a little bit weird. You'll have to turn on the blend mode in the material settings and change it to alpha blend in order to apply some transparency. I'm going to just turn this off for now just so you can see what happens if we don't have it enabled. And in order to add transparency, what we want to do is we're going to add a transparency or a transparent shader. But in order to mix it with this emission shader, we'll have to add a mix shader as well. So we'll just drop it in the middle, and we'll just mix it like that. Now you'll see that regardless of what we set this factor, there's not going to be much of a difference because we don't currently have any transparency. So we'll need to switch it to alpha blend, and you'll see that if we change the factor here, that the amount of each shader will be modulated. Now we don't want it to just be modulated linearly. We don't want to just have it completely 50% transparent across the whole thing. We actually want the transparency to fade, to go from very highly opaque from the bottom and to go to transparent at the top. How do we do this? Well, the way that Blender interprets how to combine these two nodes is by using our mix shader factor input. And then how do we create, okay, and one more note. You see that if we set the shader to, if we set the factor to 1, this is the color, this is also interpreted as the color white, and a factor of 0 is interpreted as black. 0.5 is about a grayish color. And you can, this is basically like if we imported a completely gray square and put it into our factor input. Now, we can have a gradient in this case where we go from white, which shows our bottom shader at the bottom, to black at the top where it shows our top shader here, which has a factor of 0. And so let's create another gradient texture, and we can actually just duplicate this whole thing, and we'll just plug it into our factor. Now you'll see that it's kind of inverted here. You'll see that the transparency fades from the bottom, from having a lower transparency to being opaque at the top. So let's flip this by using our old color ramp technique. And we'll go from white to black, like that. And now you'll see that at the top where we've defined our shader as as black, it fades out towards the direction of the transparent shader. So the transparent shader will take control of the material gradually as we move towards the top. Now you can always modulate this by moving the position of the markers, or even adding more if you want a sort of a sharp decline anywhere, or a sharp gradient anywhere, and it's sort of totally up to you. Okay then. Already a pretty cool effect that we've got here. Semi-transparent with a bit of an outline at the edge. Now, this is looking pretty good. One more thing we might want to add is those vertical lines for, I think physically what are ionized particles colliding with the Earth's magnetosphere. And in order to do that, we need to sort of change how we need to not only have a flat gradient texture, but we can mix that with some noise in order to create a more interesting effect. So I'll just move that node group over there, and we'll add a noise texture. So if we find our noise texture here, in order to mix textures, we can't use a mix shader node. Instead, we use a mix RGB node, textures just being images pretty much. And we can just plug in the noise texture. And now you'll see that we have an interesting mix of noise that goes along with our gradient. Now we can duplicate this mapping. Actually, let's duplicate the mapping and texture coordinate again. We'll plug in the vector input into the noise, and we're going to just reset everything here. So we can right-click on any field and reset all to default values. Okay. And what we want to do here is we can change the scale to create those vertical lines. And we're going to have to turn up the Z scale a lot. You'll see if we turn up the Y scale, we get these sort of horizontal lines that go along the Y axis locally. And the X scale will sort of compress it on the vertical axis. And the Z scale will do about the same thing. So we can either change the Z scale or the X scale. I'll just change the X scale in this case. Okay, so now we have a bit of like a blurry effect here. Our noise is a bit blurry and it's not sharp because it's going from black to white with a bunch of shades of gray in the middle. In order to correct that, what we can do is apply another color ramp, and we'll set the easing to constant this time. And this way we'll either have black or white. That way we either have sharp noise lines or no noise at all. And you can see there's no fading in between these lines, whereas if we had an ease or any other thing, we'd have fading between the noise lines. Personally, I prefer the constant effect just because I think it fits the tune style a bit more. Yeah, that actually looks kind of cool. You could even animate the rotation of this effect if you wanted to have like a flowing river or something. Yeah, that's a good idea for a tutorial. Anyways, we'll compress it on our Z-axis and possibly also on our X-axis. Say we set both to 600. And we'll have a lot of nice vertical lines here. And now you'll see that it's combined with our other texture in order to create this nice mix. We can always, again, modulate this, so we go from our mixing factor between transparent and emission to go from completely noisy to completely gradient, and we can also go somewhere in between. And this isn't too bad. You can switch around the factor input nodes to see what happens. You'll just sort of have to inverse the mix values. Anyways, I suggest leaving them as they are. You could also change this node. So instead of having mix, you could have a multiply effect. Now you'll have to read up on what these effects do elsewhere, as I don't want to make this tutorial too long. But a multiply effect can make a much more interesting effect perhaps than the mix shader. Now let's change up the colors a little bit. Let's have the gradient for the intensity shift up a little bit, and maybe we'll move down the white. And we'll turn up the strength also to maybe something 5. It's a bit much. 4. Finally, we'll add some bloom. And there we go, an Aurora effect. Now if you go back into default view, you'll see that we have this really nice spiral thing. You can go into wireframe, duplicate it, rotate it around. And if we move our camera to somewhere below, and we hit Control and 0, we'll have some really cool auroras. Now, another cool thing about this effect is that we can apply it to a lot of things. We can apply it to any mesh that we choose, including the Suzanne, and only half of it's going to be transparent. So yeah, Suzanne Aurora, looking through. And there's our final render. So feel free to check out my website if you want a node layout as well as a text tutorial. I have a ton of other Blender tutorials on my YouTube channel and on my website where you can always check out the text versions completely for free. And yeah, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!